say that again. Life is about the choices that we make. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility." I remember as a child having to choose to do or not do certain things that would shape my life as I've gotten older. Chose to read with a lot of my free time, and it helped me to learn beyond the schoolroom. I chose to write, and it helped me learn to communicate with other people. I chose learning as a lifestyle, and most of the things that I choose to learn come fairly easily because of it. But it all started with believing something that my father told me. A good education is the one thing that can never be taken away from you. By believing this, I set myself up for a life of seeking and sharing knowledge. However, one of the most problematic decisions I've ever had to make had to do with continuing my education. It had to do with going to seminary. At the time, I was serving as a youth minister, a worship leader for a larger church, and a pastor, kind of a caretaker really, for a small dwindling congregation. Both churches had strong personalities in them, and both of them had people who wished to control the church direction. But in truth, there was so much potential for these churches. So many people that were involved in ministry, so many people that were getting involved in things, so many people that were willing to do more in and for their faith. I had served for 2 years at each while I was taking classes online at Asbury. The program for a Master's of Divinity required you to do a certain amount of classwork on campus, which was 6 hours away in Kentucky. Now, I could do weekend classes. I could go once a weekend, once a month, and that might have been an option, but it was difficult. It meant taking one weekend out of every month and driving up to Lexington and spending the night and the expensive hotel rooms, and all of that sort of thing. And the travel distance, the traveling back and forth, was very tiresome. I tried it a few semesters and I got in a few classes that way, but it was really hard to be traveling once a month, pastoring a church, serving another. And so Heather and I started to pray about it. Began talking about it, talked with some really close friends of ours, and we came to the decision that we would need to move to the main campus at Asbury in Wilmore. At the time, we were excited about it, but it wasn't necessarily what I would have liked to do. There were ministries that were just beginning to get off the ground. There were youth in our youth program that I was hoping to see all the way through to their high school graduation. There were people that we had formed strong friendships, strong bonds with, both other ministers in the community and people from the churches themselves. On top of all of that, the grandparents lived no more than an hour's drive away from where we were serving in most any direction. So the kids were getting the opportunity to spend a great deal of time with them. Neither of us at that time had lived more than an hour or so away from Atlanta, and we wondered, what was it going to be like? Grandparents missing grandchildren. What was it going to be like being away from home? Away from the things we knew, away from the things we were comfortable with, away from all of those things that had come to define life for us as a married couple and as a family. Finally, we visited the campus in Wilmore together. And at that point, we realized this is what we need to do. It was time to make the choice and finish the next part of this process toward ordination. It would be one of many choices that would shape my future during those few years in Kentucky. Truth is, everything we do is choice. We all chose to get out of bed this morning. We all chose to come here and worship with our church family today. Hopefully, we all chose to wear warm coats to church today. I don't see any swimsuits out there or anything like that. Even now, we're choosing to engage with this sermon, or we're choosing to daydream, or think about lunch, or the Steelers game later today, or all kinds of things that are going on in our lives. We make the choice to be here, engage, and be a part of this fellowship together in these moments. This is what it is to be human, is to choose. Now, for a group of people in the first century, a series of choices led them to see one of the most incredible things to ever happen in creation. What little is known about them comes from the Gospel of Matthew, which tells us only that they came from the east. They studied the stars. And from the things that they read and the stars that they saw, they knew a Jewish king was to be born. Their journey started when they began learning to be magi or astrologers. Now, understand that an astrologer in that day was not a fortune teller with a 250-word column in a local newspaper. It was more akin to an astronomer or a scientist. These people were revered for their knowledge of nature as students of nature. They searched the heavens for changes in the alignment of the stars. They cataloged constellations. They charted the courses of planets. These men probably began at an early age looking to the heavens in awe and inspiration. As they grew up, they apprenticed themselves to more experienced astrologers, and they learned how to follow these movements in the sky. These choices led the men to notice something in the heavens one night, a star like they had never seen before. Some astronomers now believe it may have been a freak alignment of the planets and other stars. Some say perhaps it was a supernova that was closer than any had ever been. But to the Magi, this was something more. This was something beyond the ordinary. And it brought them to a place where they needed to search for the meaning of it. They knew it meant something. They knew there was something deeper there. They knew there was something beyond the norm in this simple light in the sky. Since the Magi were believed to be Persian, which would account for their knowledge of scriptures passed on to them during Israel's exile, they may have had to travel as far as modern Baghdad in Iraq to Bethlehem. They traveled the same path, marked by one star, moving in one direction to a singular destination. Their search led them first to the palace of King Herod. In Herod's palace, the Magi came and they paid homage to the local king, and they found themselves facing another series of choices. Herod, by all accounts, was a jealous person, fearful of his position as the Roman puppet king in Palestine. And as the Magi begin to speak of this new king, as they talk about this star that has led them to this place to worship one born to rule over Israel, Herod hears in their words a threat. They speak of one whose star they have followed, this new king born according to the stars and ancient writings of wisdom. And the king, while nervous, while jealous, while by many counts reprehensible, is a clever man. And so he charges these Magi to go. Find this newborn king. Find this new ruler of Israel. But return. Return and tell him, Herod the puppet, Herod the jealous, Herod who constantly feared for his position, tell him where this child king resides. We all know the story. We just heard it from the Gospel of Matthew. We've known it in children's stories. We've seen it in Christmas plays and pageants. The Magi go. They find this child of promise, whom they prostrate themselves in worship ceremonies and important social events, and they present gifts. Gifts which speak of the greatness of the one that they have come to see. Gifts reserved for only those great occasions of life. Myrrh, a spice used as a cosmetic fragrance, as well as an ointment for death and burial. Gold, the symbol of ultimate value and power according to the world system. And of course, frankincense, another perfumed element which spoke of royalty and greatness. They offer these gifts. They pay homage to the child king. They prepare to return to their homeland, and as they sleep, they dream. And as astrologers, they have learned to pay attention, to listen to these dreams. They've learned that these dreams are important. And so an angel warns them. It says that the path should not be taken back to the palace of Herod, but should go another route as they return home. They heed the warning, and they return to Persia by a different route. Now, throughout this story, the people involved are presented over and over with a variety of choices. They're presented with paths to travel as they live out their part, as they live out their lives. In this brief excerpt from the birth narrative of Jesus, there are so many choices that have been made by so many different people, all with different degrees of consequence. Herod's jealousy of a potential usurper in the story leads to the decision of slaughtering innocent children in Bethlehem. This is the result of the decision made by the Magi to travel away from Jerusalem on their return home. By doing so, Herod grows more jealous, more nervous, and feels that the best way to maintain his rule is to make sure that it's not possible for a child king to come out of Bethlehem. The murderous mind and heart of Herod leads Joseph and the young family into exile as they flee to Egypt. Interestingly enough, the entire episode presents a motif of the Exodus and the flight from Egypt and the exile as the innocents are killed and those left in Israel and Judah during the captivity are followed by returning under a different king. This is a type of the slaughter of the innocents and a type of Joseph and his family as the Jewish people going to and from Israel. Just as this story has a series of choice consequence moments, so do all of our lives. Each of us has made a series of decisions that have in many ways led us to this moment we experience right now. Think back. Think through all of the decisions that you have made, or decisions that have been made for or in spite of you, that have led you to being where you are right now. The good, the bad, the ridiculous, the sublime, all of this is the sum total of the path that leads each of us here. All of us came to this place by a different road. And I think we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions. First, what do we learn from those things that have led us to now? Can we look back on the life that we have led and the things that we have done and the places that we have been with some objectivity, through the positive, through the negative, and see life lessons with enough clarity to accept and learn from them? I believe we've all experienced a combination of things in life. It's not all good, it's not all bad. But how do we interpret these things? How do we come to understand these things? How do we see the path and the choices? I think the best way is to acknowledge it as is. Where we make mistakes, admit them to ourselves. Where we've hurt others, seek forgiveness. Where others have hurt us, offer forgiveness. Where things have gone well, celebrate. In all of these instances, I think we need to be willing to see, and see with as much objectivity as we possibly can, in order to learn. Second, how do these things we have learned point us to a more clearly defined path? One which specifically aligns with the way or the path of Jesus. How do we go forward with the information that we have gleaned in a way that reflects our desires to be disciples of Jesus? I think we need to learn the way in order to do that. I think it requires a combination of studying Scripture, especially the Gospels, in my opinion, looking back at the traditions of the church, applying our ability to reason, and considering our own experience and the experiences around us. I think we need to be willing to look both within ourselves and around us at those in our midst who have and are traveling similar paths to our own. And the second thing I think we need to do is to practice. Nothing that we learn is ever learned without trying, failing, and trying again. If life is a race, it's a marathon, not a sprint. There's enough time for us to walk the walk and learn as we go, and use these practices that we're talking about here. Within all of this seeking of the path, within all of this learning from the road behind us, we have to remember that the choice is made in the now. It's made in these moments, right now. As we consider, as we look at ourselves, our relationship to God, and our relationship to one another. Ultimately, it's the question that we have to ask ourselves to know, have we loved God? Have we loved our neighbor? Are we loving God presently? Are we loving our neighbor presently? And are we willing, as we continue on and go forward on the path, to continue to love God and to seek out opportunities to love one another and to love our neighbor?